Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today's a solo episode, and in today's episode, I want to go over a building phase strategies to keep you leaner, stronger, and feeling better in your phases outside of fat loss. So in that way, you don't feel like you have to always go back to fat loss there. But first, before I go into that, I have my free body recomp checklist. In that checklist, I go over 10 things you need for body recomp, the two different types of body recomp, why it's important to focus on body comp over just fat loss. And so again, if you're interested in that, the link to that is in the show notes on there. And if you enjoy this and you enjoy my content and you're looking at getting some more help around your building phases or adding more muscle or improving performance or improving your overall health or dropping some body fat to get leaner for the summer, then I have my one-on-one coaching. If you're interested in that or you want to learn more, the link to that is in the show notes as well too. And you can reach out to me on Instagram at Jeff, HOEHN_. All right. So with that out of the way, let's dive into today's topic, which is around building phases. I wanted to make this episode for people because if you feel like you have to diet year round to stay in shape, or I've heard this a lot of times too, where it's like, hey, maybe in my building phase I didn't gain as much muscle, I just gained a little bit more body fat, or hey, when I get into a phase outside of fat loss, like I just gained fat, and it's frustrating, right? Because then you either have to fat loss diet more than you think, you don't really change your physique, or again, you feel like you have to fat loss diet either year round. Oh, hey, I can only eat X amount of calories, or again, you just feel like you have to go back to fat loss more often than you would, right? And what the downside of that is if you go back to fat loss too often, you're probably not going to see the physique change long term that you want to see there. This is for you if you feel like you struggle with that. The goal of a building phase isn't to stay extremely lean or to underfuel, right? So I do want to make that known up front that we're not trying to like get you to undereat, because that is definitely something that I see people hear. Oh, hey, like they expect to stay way too lean. But on the flip side, I see a lot of people swing too far in the other direction, right? They overdo calories, let slip, and end up gaining more body fat than they need it. And so because of that, they feel like they have to diet year round or diet more often than they think, or they just say, hey, building phases don't work for me. This isn't the right approach for me. Like anytime I eat outside of fat loss, I just gain a bunch of weight. So therefore they stay low calorie, which again is going to have some downsides. I've talked about that multiple times in the past on this episode, but just a few of them would be, hey, you're going to have a lower metabolic rate, a slightly, I like to call it artificially low maintenance calories. You may find that like things like thyroid may be off a little bit. You're just going to be a little bit hungrier and you're just not going to feel as good as you could if that's the case. And what we're looking at here in a building phase is just think of this as a phase outside of fat loss. I went over last week body recomposition. Basically the two phases that we'll be in throughout the year would be some form of building phase, right? Where again, it doesn't necessarily have to be a surplus. There's different ways that you can do it. But again, just think we're not in a deficit. And then we have fat loss, right? That's where we're going to push that deficit a bit more. And again, I like to balance that throughout the year with probably eventually getting you to like a 3 to 4 to 1 ratio of building to fat loss within a year. And sometimes it's a 1 to 0 ratio in terms of building to fat loss there. But again, the takeaway from that is we eventually want to spend more time at maintenance or higher, depending on where you're at there. So again, a well-executed building phase should help you build muscle, improve performance, and feel better without adding a bunch of body fat on there. So how I want to incorporate this today is I want to talk about just general strategies, and then I'm going to go over a few ways that I've incorporated this into my building phases so you can see how I've practiced some of these things as well too. And maybe some things that I'll go over these things, and these are generally good rules of thumb, but you may find that there's certain things that help you better in a building phase. I think by going over my experience and what I'm focused on now, that may help you there. All right, so my first one is, so again, just so we realize here, again, a building phase is typically going to be a phase where we're eating at maintenance or a small surplus. Again, the biggest thing is we're just not in a deficit. We're not pushing fat loss in this phase, okay? And so because of that, we are going to be a little bit more on the anabolic side versus catabolic. And because of that, I think that allows for, we need to start to pay attention to things a little bit more than what we would if we were in a fat loss phase. I still think meal timing matters in a fat loss phase, but because you're pushing that catabolic side a lot more, the breaking down, it gives us a little bit more flexibility with some things. And really the goal becomes like, how can we build this into your day to where you're managing hunger and you're not finding yourself ravenously hungry, right? But we do have a little bit more flexibility. For example, and let's just dive into this first one because it will all make sense here. So my first one is be smarter with food around sleep. So as calories increase and you get deeper into your build, how you eat in your bedtime matters more. I mean, a lot of this has to do with more so how our body, from a glucose standpoint, as we get later into the day, our blood sugar regulation is not as good. Digestion's not as good, and it can also impact sleep the later we eat. And I think the two big ones here that we would want to consider would be your digestion and your blood sugar, right? Because if we're already consistently eating a good amount of food, right, at maintenance or a small surplus, we can't expect, you're probably going to start to see things like blood glucose sort of drift up over time. Again, as long as we're moderating things fine, it's not necessarily anything problematic per se. But again, as you get to higher body fat levels, the longer you consume higher amounts of calories, I do think it does start to become something that we want to watch. And so for also knowing that how our body works on the circadian rhythm and blood sugar regulation tends to drop off as the day goes on, we probably want to watch our food around sleep a little bit more. And like I said, from a blood sugar regulation standpoint, but also even a digestion standpoint. If you're also consistently eating a lot more calories, that's just a lot more work that your GI tract, your digestion needs to do throughout the day. And for also hammering more food on at the end of the day, that can become problematic there. And again, digestion also is something that tends to decrease as the day goes on. Like it's just not as effective as the day goes on. You can still eat at night. We just need to make sure that we make better choices as we get closer to sleep. We're thinking more protein heavy, less carb and fat heavy type meals, right? So we're just really trying to avoid those like large heavy meals right before bed. And I bring this up in this phase too, because this is a phase where, because you're not in a fat loss phase, people's nutrition habits will likely change a little bit. You'll add in a little bit more flexibility, which we want for sure. For now, starting to have a lot of these late night eatings where you're having these higher carb, higher fat type meals, more processed type foods, that are low in protein, etc. Again, like you do it one time, not going to become problematic. But again, you continue to do that and then you continue to stack on, hey, you're eating more. That's where it can become problematic. So I do think that time around sleep, particularly pre-sleep, is going to be super important. And then on top of it, it can also impact sleep, which now for impacting sleep, that's going to impact blood sugar regulation the next day. It's going to impact digestion the next day. And then this can be just a vicious cycle over time there. And so what can quickly happen is if you do that, maybe in the short term, at the beginning of your building phase, not really anything that's going to matter, but you keep doing that over and over again. And now our phase is going to become you're less productive as you continue to do that. Now, some people, it may not impact them as much. Again, I really do think this depends a little bit on genetics, but also leanness and everything else that you're doing throughout the day. But in saying that, I think a good rule of thumb, if you look back on your building phases, if you tend to eat more around sleep or maybe eat later in the day and you make these types of choices, this would be a place that I would look at right off the bat of, okay, hey, potentially work on that. What I was going to say earlier is, because in a fat loss phase, like I still think this would be something you'd want to watch. However, as you get leaner and you're in a deficit for longer, it's almost to the point to where, like, for some people, the further away they eat food from sleep, it can start to negatively impact sleep. So you might find some benefit of doing that there. Again, this is where your context and where you're at specifically in terms of body composition, what you've been doing from an energy balance standpoint does become more important there. So again, I think the big thing just think is, hey, the longer that you've been in that anabolic state, eating maintenance or higher, if your body fat does start to come up a little bit, this is where we want to really start to try and push food a little bit further away from sleep. But if we do, again, one night, not going to be problematic. The more you do it, the more problematic it can be, right? But again, we just look at making better choices. Maybe in that last meal, we're going to be higher protein. So maybe something like a Greek yogurt is what you would do in that meal, right? Versus, all right, you're going to smash half a pizza right before bed, right? Those would be two extremes there with that. And somebody may ask, well, like, how far away from sleep? I think, again, those heavier meals, as far away as you can get it, 3-4 hours. And then again, if you're going to have something like just protein, I think you can really go up to test it out and see what works best for you. But I think within 1 to 2 hours, if it is like a quote unquote smarter choice, you're probably fine there. This is number 2, but it goes hand in hand with the first one, is be careful. Don't save all your calories for later in the day. I think this happens for 2 reasons. I think it happens, one, poor planning on someone's part, or maybe they're not as hungry during the day, or things get busy and they skip some meals earlier in the day, right? And then all of a sudden it's, oh crap, I need to hit 3,000 calories, but I've only eaten 500 calories and it's 6 p.m. In that situation, I would much rather all right, we're probably just going to be a little bit under, still try and make good choices there, and then just start over and just make sure that you're planning ahead and eating more regularly throughout the day and getting a little bit more food earlier in the day. I think the second one would be the person that just was like, hey, I like to bank my calories for later. And again, I think that can become problematic even in a build phase. I think it really is problematic in a fat loss phase, but it's also problematic in a building phase for multiple reasons. One, digestion. Again, if we're trying to eat a lot of calories and then we're also eating a ton of calories later in the day, that's just going to put a lot of strain on your GI tract and digestion. And again, knowing what I just talked about as the day goes on, our body tends to be less efficient from a digestion standpoint. I think from an energy perspective, right, if you're not eating throughout the day, you may find that could impact your training, right? If you're not eating enough throughout the day and around training, and you may find that, again, if you're hungry, that may impact your ability to perform in whatever you need to perform in during the day. And even again, blood sugar control perspective, right? So that just goes back to the sleep thing again. As the day goes on, we tend to, blood sugar regulation efficiency goes down. Your body just doesn't handle that as well. And then, so there's that. But I also think just massive amount of calories at one time also, I feel, is not great from a blood sugar control standpoint. So again, that doesn't mean we need to eat super small meals, but I also think if you're having a meal you're eating 200 calorie meal or 2 calorie meals earlier in the day, and then all of a sudden, again, you eat a meal that's 2,500 to 3,000 calories at night to make up for your calories. Again, I do think that is going to be something that, okay, one time not going to be problematic, but you consistently do that over and over again. And I do think that is going to impact blood sugar control and how efficient that process is, which I'm going to talk more about that later. Is something that we do want to look at as we get deeper into a building phase, because that can be something that, again, if blood glucose slowly starts to rise, and let's say fasted blood glucose slowly starts to rise, again, you look at it early in your building phase and it's in the 80s, right? Because you're leaner, you started building, and then all of a sudden it slowly drifts up over time. Your A1C starts to drift up over time. That's definitely a sign that we're getting less out of that building phase on there. But all these strategies I'm talking about today will certainly help with that on there. Again, distribute your food more evenly and front load a bit more earlier in the day. So I'd much rather see somebody get and build more throughout earlier in your day. That doesn't mean that you can't eat after, say, 5 p.m., but just make sure from a digestion standpoint, energy standpoint, and blood sugar control, we're starting to bias a little bit more food earlier in the day. Again, I think that this becomes more, I think it's always problematic from a digestion standpoint. I think it's always problematic from an energy standpoint, obviously food choice perspective and eating in the right amount of calories, because then it's easier to overconsume calories later. But again, I think as we get deeper into a build phase, it definitely is important to make sure you're fueling regularly throughout the day to keep all those things sharp that I was talking about. Number 3, prioritize food around your workouts. Training performance matters a ton in a building phase and phases outside of. Training performance is always important, but I think that too many people focus solely on like the calorie amount that they're eating when it comes to, say, building muscle, changing body composition. And those things do matter, but people tend to overlook training performance and what you're doing in that. And fueling around your workouts, it's going to improve performance and recovery, which is going to lead to better training and more progress, right? If we can have more productive training sessions more often and we can recover from those, you're going to be able to do more and get away with more. And you're going to see better results from that, right? Because training, while you can't just train a ton and speed up muscle growth, there are going to be people that probably are leaving a lot on the table from a training perspective. They don't set themselves up regularly enough to have good training sessions versus someone who does have this dialed in. Like, I do think over time, that person that has things dialed in, they recover better, they are able to push their training more often. They're going to end up with more muscle growth in that time span there. So again, I do think that this is something that can speed up your results and give you better body comp changes over time and sooner as well too. So again, we want to prioritize food around our workouts there. Number 4, go to maintenance calories eventually or throughout. So I think a big thing that people think is when they're in a building phase, they have to be in a calorie surplus, which is not always the case. I do think your body composition is super important here in terms of if you need to or not. If you are someone who is not necessarily on the leaner side and you still have some muscle to build, like, you don't need to be in a surplus. You don't need to push your body weight up. Now, you may see your body weight come up a little bit over time. That's different than purposely trying to push your body weight up X amount per month there, right? I don't think that you need to do that if you cross those two boxes, right? You're not, say, under 15% for men, under 22 to 25% for women. You can stay at maintenance calories and still build muscle. Now, in saying that, we still need to make sure training performance is in check. And then everything else on here that's going to help you get more out of being at maintenance and building muscle. So I think that's one level for people, is you don't automatically have to be in a surplus. Now, if you're someone who is a bit on the leaner side, right, you're in that 10 to 15% range on the lower end, under that for men, under that 22 to 25% or under for women, and you already have a good amount of muscle or decent amount of muscle, you're going to have to be someone that does purposely push up your weight for a period of time. You're going to have to get into a surplus there. You're not going to be able to stay at those leaner body fat ranges and build muscle, at least effectively. And again, depending on where you're at in terms of biofeedback and blood work and things like that, like you might, hey, we probably want to push weight up a little bit here in this situation. So there's that. So I think first looking at, do you even need to be in a surplus? And if you do, okay, that's good. All right, like some people do need to be in at least a small surplus. I still, no matter what, would keep that surplus small, because as you continue to push the surplus up, you gain weight quicker and quicker. Again, if you have a lot of muscle that you can potentially build, like weight gain in the very short term, I'm not concerned about, but it's like this consistent, hey, each week you weigh in, you're up a pound on average. Like that's probably a bit too aggressive, right? Like you probably need to back off. But you have 1 week where you're up a pound. I'm not really concerned about that. It's more the trends that we're looking at there. But I think across the board, the quicker you gain weight over time, your body is going to start to gain a little bit more body fat, and you don't need to do that to build muscle on there, right? Like it's not going to speed up muscle growth once you get into these larger and larger surpluses. And larger surplus would be your weight coming up consistently quickly, right? So there's that. So you have people that need to be at maintenance, or can be at maintenance and still build muscle, and then you have people that need to be in a surplus there. Saying that, let's say you are that person that you're on the leaner side and you did need to be in a surplus. You can also get to a body weight and body fat range where you feel good, body comp is solid, body biofeedback is good, and performance is good. And you can push closer to maintenance calories instead of continuously pushing weight up. A lot of people think that they need to be in a surplus, like they're in a building phase, they need to be in a surplus the entire time. I've done this in the past where it's, oh, hey, I'm in a surplus, I'm in a building phase, I just need to continue to push weight up, up and up. And I don't think you need to do that. I think you can push your weight up a little bit, find that range that you feel good at, and then boom, like you just sit there for a while, especially if you feel good, body fat, like your body comp maybe isn't as lean as it was when you were at the end of your deficit or your leanest, but it's still in a good spot. Like you're still fairly lean. Biofeedback's good, like digestion's good, you're feeling good, and you're performing, you're getting stronger. That's a great spot to be in. And you can sit there and milk that weight range out versus continuously trying to be in a surplus there. There's a few different scenarios there where, hey, you have that one avatar person where they basically can just be at maintenance the entire time they're in their building phase. They don't have to push their weight up. Now, in saying that, their weight may come up as a byproduct of good training. You're adding some muscle, and so you may see your weight slowly drift up over extended periods of time. That's okay. I'm not concerned about that. But then you have the other subset of people where it's like, hey, you do need to be in a surplus, but since we are in that surplus, like you can push your weight up, find that range that you feel good in, and then you can drop back to maintenance. And again, your weight still may come up slightly over time, but it's not a bad thing. I think that's more of a, hey, this is productive training that you're doing, and that's a byproduct of that there. That's not to be confused with a surplus because you see your weight come up 1 to 2 pounds on average over a 3 to 6 month span there. That's different than, hey, you're pushing your weight up half a pound a week, et cetera there. So that's one thing that I've incorporated into my building phases. And I think this can keep you staying in a productive building phase without having to go back into it can keep fat gain at a minimum, and it can keep you in this productive state for longer periods of time. And then you also, the pro of this is when you do go in fat loss diet, you don't have to take off a bunch of body fat. You can kind of get in and get out of your fat loss phases a lot quicker there. And I think overarching, that's another big thing of benefit of doing this is, again, you don't have to now spend more time fat loss dieting. I think the longer you fat loss diet, you do risk a little bit of muscle loss, et cetera. So now we can get in and get out from a fat loss perspective. So I think that's a benefit of doing all these things that I'm talking about as well today too. Okay, now we'll go into number 5 here. It's deeper into builds, strategically introduce small/short catabolic periods. So this is one that I've recently implemented and started thinking about there. And so what this means is if you've been at maintenance or in a surplus for a while, where again, we talked about this, you're spending more time in an anabolic state, which is the goal of a build. At this point, if you've been doing this for a while, you can occasionally add in a lower carb day / extended fasting day, or a fasted low intensity cardio session, or again, just longer fasts throughout. So why? Again, this can help keep things in check and maintain how efficiently your body is using fuel, right? So when we're in a fat loss phase, everything's shifted over towards, hey, we're mostly catabolic, right? You may have some short times where you're slightly anabolic if you do like refeed days, et cetera. But for the most part, the scale is tipping towards catabolic. When we're in the building phase, we want things to be tipped more towards the anabolic side of things. And again, you may slightly dip into that catabolic state every once in a while, but for the most part, the scale's tipping this way. And so what we want to do is, if we were to look at this, we'd want to start to tip things over into that catabolic state just a little bit more, not extended periods of time, not super deep catabolic, just a little bit more there. And again, this is essentially because you've been in that anabolic kind of side of things for extended periods of time there. And so you could do a lower carb day / extended fasting day. So it's, hey, maybe 1 day a week, we have a lower carb day where, let's just say you've been hitting 350 grams of carbs consistently. Now we drop you down to say 100, something like that, right? And then you pair it with, you don't do any like weight training or any hard training sessions that day. Maybe it's like a low zone 2 session, and you do that zone 2 session in a fasted state, right? Because then we can start to hit that catabolic side just a little bit more there. Or you could do an extended fasting day where you work up to say 18 to 24 hours fasted once every couple weeks or something like that, right? Again, I think the exact protocol that you use is gonna depend on the person and where they're at in that situation. But again, it's super important to note that we don't want to have this be like a high training output day. If you're someone that likes to train a lot, you just have high training volumes, like you would need to strategically place this. And you would need to look at, does that even make sense? Because I do think that the more exercise you do, especially if it is not necessarily just weight training, but it's like more endurance style, like maybe you like to do some running or you do a decent amount of cardio, we have to understand that we're probably tipping into that catabolic side of things, that kind of AMPK pathway versus the mTOR pathway. We're probably hitting that a little bit more when we exercise. So again, I don't think if you're someone that does have a high training output, this would be something that we would look at. Does it make sense? Now, what I'm doing specifically for me is I'm just extending my fasting window, like having a 12-ish hour fasting window consistently, right? So I think the more aggressive you get, so if you do a lower carb day or an extended fasting day, you don't have to necessarily do that daily longer fast. But for me, I'm doing a longer fast of 10 to 12 hours, 12-ish hours, 10 to 14 hours, a daily kind of thing there with that, right? So it's, hey, do we hit the frequency side of things or do we hit the more like aggressive kind of side of things there? And again, remember though, a couple notes here. This isn't a tool to make up for poor nutrition habits during a build. So we don't want to use this as, oh, hey, I can go crazy 5 days out of the week because I'm going to do a fasting day or extended fast day, or I'm going to do a lower carb day. We don't want that to be the case. We can't make up for that. Like everything else still needs to be the same. We obviously want to have flexibility, but we don't want to use that as a way to make up for, as an excuse to now have poor nutrition 3, 4, 5, 6 days out of the week for that, right? And second, if you're already lean or haven't spent much time at maintenance or in a surplus, this isn't a strategy for you. So if you're someone that, hey, you've been doing the building phase for 2 weeks, and you're like, ooh, yeah, this is going to be perfect for me because then I can still really limit fat gain. That's not like, it needs to be deeper into a build. I would never do this for someone that just came out of a fat loss phase within the last 2 months. And I would be really careful to implement this with someone who has tended to always fat loss diet and been lower calories for extended periods of time. So it needs to work. I think when you hear that, this would probably work a bit better for men in general. This is a very generalized thing here. I think in general, this would be a bit better of an approach for men than women. But saying that, I definitely have had some female clients do this with good success. Now, we obviously need to look for overall recovery. Does this decrease your recovery? Then it may not be a good strategy for you. Or again, does it also impact hunger, which then has impact later on down the line in terms of now you overeat or training performance is impacted. It really is important to look at the individual there and just understand that if we're going to do this, needs to be something that we do later on into the building phase. Again, same thing with just if you have a couple days where you eat close to bed early in your build phase, not really problematic. But if you can consistently do that over time, and then you're gaining weight over time because you're strategic weight gain or whatever it may be, even if it's unstrategic weight gain, that's where we really want to be careful with that. And same thing here, you're just not going to get that benefit out of things if you're on the leaner side and or you exercise a ton. Then we, again, have to be careful with how we implement this if that's the case. So again, I like to exercise a lot, so I do need to be strategic with where I place my workouts and how aggressive I get, right, with this. I also think this strategy does help with metabolic flexibility, which again, as you're in a surplus for longer or at maintenance and you're more on that anabolic side and you're adding more muscle, et cetera, I do think that can be something that starts, your metabolic flexibility can start to decrease. So this helps with that, which in turn just helps how your body uses the fuel that you give it. And again, I think that if we can touch both of those zones, those kind of pathways from like an energy, from a metabolism standpoint, this is going to be beneficial, especially as you get deeper into a building phase here. So again, like I said, the more you exercise, you're already doing this, so it maybe makes it less likely that you would need to. But again, I still think it can be a good strategy that we implement as you get deeper into your building phase there. Oops. Okay, so number 6 is eat until satisfied, not stuffed. A build phase is not an excuse to not practice good nutrition habits. Like, you still need to moderate your overall intake. This was a huge mistake I used to make in the past where it's, oh, I'm in a building phase, so I'm just going to eat and I just need the calories, right? So it's like an excuse to overeat food where it's like we want more flexibility, but you have to like still moderate and manage your food intake overall, right? So again, like my best thing here is like just eat, enjoy tasty foods, but don't do it to the point to where it's like, oh my gosh, I'm never going to get this food again. And then you overconsume food regularly. And then again, that's where you can start to gain body fat over time. And I think this can show up when a couple things, right? I think this can show up if you save all your calories for later in the day, right? It could be a strategy where if you do that, now you're more likely to eat past fullness because you're not eating more calories balanced throughout the day. I think this could show up if you try and implement you try to implement more of those catabolic periods, and maybe you're being a bit too aggressive with those catabolic periods that we were just talking about. So again, I think that's when those things can start to show up on there. And they can also start to show up when I go over the next couple of things here as well too. So number 7 is keep your base nutrition in place. Don't drop fruits and veggies just because calories are higher. Like micronutrients, digestion, and overall health still matter. So again, to come back to that last one, if you don't keep a good base of nutrition in, now you're probably going to be more likely to eat past fullness. And that's where, again, calories can start to add up over time. So I can't stress enough the importance of keeping a good base of nutrition in. I think most people that struggle with this phase, their nutrition looks completely different than what it does when they're fat loss dieting. So we still need to have a good base on there. Now, saying that, I've seen this get taken too far as well too, where people feel like they're super scared of gaining weight. So then they still try to like eat a bunch of quote unquote fat loss diet type foods in their phase, right? Like the best way I can say this is like, hey, you just keep brown rice in because you think it's more satiating than white rice. You eat a bunch of cauliflower rice because again, you're trying to increase food volume. You just eat a ton of fruit and veggies and are scared to have anything like rice or something like that. It's okay. You do still, there's two sides of this, right? Where it's like you have that person where they just completely change what they're eating and it's okay. What happened to all your nutrition habits that you had? Just because you're in a building phase doesn't mean that we can start to change that up. Because again, that's going to lead to easier time over consuming calories. Just because again, especially if you do it early in your building phase and you're hungry, it can be really hard to manage food intake. But again, there's those people that are like, oh, I can't eat over 1,200 calories. But you look at their diet and it's like literally all cauliflower rice, just a bunch of broccoli, 200 grams of protein for a 130-pound person. So yeah, your food volume's so high, like you need to add in some foods that are a little bit more calorie dense on there. So again, you see both sides of that there. Watch that, but we still need to keep a good base on there with our nutrition. Number 8, keep protein up. Now, in saying that, you don't have to eat some ungodly amount of protein, but again, just make sure you have a good base during your build to help with hunger. Obviously, we don't want to now see protein drop super low because you're in a phase. And I think that comes back to still keeping a good base of your nutrition in place is super helpful. It obviously can help with calorie control. Again, it helps manage your overall intake. Obviously helps with muscle gain, making sure we get enough protein in is going to help with muscle gain. Now, if you just keep doing more and more protein, it's not necessarily going to help with more muscle growth. Training is going to be the big driver there, plus calories on there. And we can take advantage of the higher thermic effect of food. You're going to see slightly higher calorie burn from protein than say something like carbs and fat. So if we can keep protein at a good base, you're definitely going to be in a good spot. For some people, what are we kind of looking at? I think 0.8 to 1 gram per pound of body weight is that sweet spot. I think you can make a case for going higher for all these things that I just talked about, right? Not necessarily muscle gain, but managing hunger, calorie control, and taking advantage of that higher thermic effect of food. Now, I'm saying that going from 0.8 grams per pound of body weight to 1.2 is not going to be this like, oh my gosh, you're going to be able to eat an extra 500 calories, right? You're probably looking at 50 to 100-ish calories, if that. But just to give you an idea of, it's not a lot that you would be able to add in, which 50 to 100 calories is easily lost within any sort of measurement error from tracking and everything like that. Obviously, if we go higher protein, that's going to take away from carbs and fats, which comes back to the issue that I was saying, where then we could potentially lead to underfueling, which is we certainly don't want to do that during our building phase. So you do have to look out for that with getting protein higher. But I do think for some people, keeping protein relatively high during a build can also help all these things and keep calories in check. So we at least want to keep protein up around that 0.8 grams per pound of body weight there. Next one is keep doing cardio. Like cardio is going to help with recovery. It's going to help with work capacity. It's going to help with metabolic health, right? It's going to help with overall energy flux. You're just going to burn more calories overall. That's not why we're doing it, but it is going to help increase that energy flux. So it's like you have a little bit more flexibility and wiggle room with your nutrition, and it builds capacity and new muscle. So obviously the goal of this phase is, hey, we do want to add some muscle to your frame. And if we keep cardio in, it's going to help keep that capacity to, when you build more muscle, like that's more tissue. And so you need to make sure that your cardiovascular fitness stays up to be able to help that muscle function and have it be well-functioning muscle. Whereas if you just add a bunch of muscle and you're not doing cardio with it, that may not be the most, I don't want to say like functional, but it may not be the most functional muscle unless we also keep up our cardiovascular fitness with that increase in size of muscle there. But like I said, it can also help with metabolic health. I talked about earlier how watching fasting glucose, fasting insulin, A1C, triglycerides, et cetera, can be super important in a building phase, especially as you're pushing maybe weight up a little bit, et cetera. It can help with that. It can help keep that in check, which in turn means that you're going to have, from like a nutrition partitioning standpoint, like you're going to be able to have a longer, more productive building phase. Plus work capacity, if work capacity slash recovery, cardiovascular fitness, improving that is going to allow you to recover faster which will lead to more high quality work that you can do, which in turn is going to help with muscle growth there, right? There's that thought of, oh, if you do a bunch of cardio, you're going to lose muscle. Again, that's not the case. It's only the case if you don't know how to program cardio, you just do way too much. And again, your recovery outside of the gym is just trash. Then yes, it will likely start to impact adding muscle. But if those things are in check, which they should be in a building phase, you really can start to push cardio, like you still are constrained with time, but that's going to allow you to get more productive muscle building training out and be able to stay in this phase a bit longer while keeping fat gain lower. Because again, you're also going to get the higher energy flux from doing more cardio. But like I said, the trick really becomes making sure you're fueling enough for that. And I did talk about earlier how one of the things we could do is be slightly catabolic. At the end of the day, like exercise is going to, especially endurance type exercise, cardiovascular fitness type training, catabolic slash that AMPK pathway, like it is going to tip you in that direction a little bit more, which again, I think is good there. So it's also going to do that. But like I said, it does become problematic when you're under eating and you do it too much and is poorly programmed, then yeah, that's not going to be great there either. A couple other things that I want to add real quick is I think monitoring blood work during this time can be super important, right? Or if you have maybe like a glucometer or something, like watching that, seeing where your fasting glucose is trending at over time. I think once you start to get above 100 regularly and you pair that with, oh, hey, A1C is also coming up with that, fasting triglycerides are coming up, fasting insulin's coming up, looking at your lipids, if those do start to over time, which it's a lot, fasting glucose is going to be the one you're going to be able to get in real time a lot quicker. The other ones really don't want somebody to have to get their blood work done too often. I think that's a pain and again, just not practical for people. And you just don't need to. So looking at the trends of those over time, like maybe you do it again, depending on where you're at, if you can afford it, if you can do it, I think every 6-ish months is solid. If you can do it more than that's great. It's just going to be expensive. And I don't expect people to do that. It's just not practical. So that's where using something like fasting glucose can be helpful because it is, you could get a glucometer, you could get a CGM, and you can start to see that a little bit more and you can get a little bit more feedback on that. So like signs that your building phase is becoming less productive is, again, you do see that trend up in fasting glucose. Again, it starts to get up above 100. Again, looking at your CGM, watching that, you're now starting to notice that your spikes are getting higher, they're lasting longer, it's not coming back to the normal range as quickly. These would all be signs that we're getting less out of our building phase at that point. And this is where now we would want to look at, hey, do we need to incorporate a little bit more catabolic type stuff in there, right? Like a little bit more of those strategic catabolic periods? Do we need to go to maintenance instead of continuously pushing your weight up? Do we need to focus a little bit more on conditioning, right? Do we need to make better food choices, right? This is just going to give you that data to be like, all right, out of these things that I'm doing, what can I start to prioritize here a bit more, right? Is it meal timing? Is it I need to do more of my food around my training? Maybe I need to get a little bit higher protein versus being lower protein. Maybe I need to go to maintenance. Maybe I need to throw in one fasted day, right? Not fasted day, but fasted training session or things like that. And again, I think so those would be subjective markers that you're going to get. Now, obviously, I do think it's important to work with someone that understands how these things work versus if you aren't and you're just like, oh, hey, Jeff said 100 on fasting glucose. Crap, I'm 101 today. I need to do all these things. I wouldn't say that's the case. I would look into this a little bit more to see if there's anything from that perspective that you could maybe implement here. But sometimes that number will just be high, or it's like when you're taking it, or again, some people will just have a higher fasting glucose from like a stress response standpoint, the dawn phenomenon, right? So it is important to be able to decipher that information, but those are signs that, hey, you're just getting less out of this building phase and you're likely now starting to see, we would just need to look into one of these strategies a little bit more. And eventually your build is going to be less effective. Another thing I would look at too would be your HSCRP. Again, same thing there. Don't expect people to take this regularly, but that can be a good thing to take to see where that's at. The higher that is, that's where I think you're going to get like less out of your building phase and continuing to push. Like that would be a sign that we would want to look into things a bit deeper there with that. The other thing too is like looking at so monitoring blood work, I think is going to be super important, right? A1C, fasting insulin, fasting glucose, triglycerides, lipids, HSCRP. Those are all good things to look at. Again, if those are off, your build's going to be less effective. And it either comes down to, hey, we need to do any one of these strategies that I talked about. We need to maybe add a little bit more small, short catabolic periods. Maybe we need to go to maintenance calories, or hey, maybe it's time for a fat loss phase. When saying that, if it's been 3 months and this is happening, it's probably one of these things that we need to look at versus you need to go back to fat loss. If it's been 12 plus months and you've been doing this and you've definitely put on some muscle, you felt good, and now this is starting to happen, then I think we can look at, all right, maybe it is time to get back into a fat loss phase. And again, this is all going to be the reason I bring this up too is that for some people, like their body's going to respond a bit better than others to these phases and being out of a deficit longer. And we do want to look at that there. Also look at your circadian rhythm. That's going to be a huge thing where if that's off, like I do think that your build phase is going to be less effective. I think a surplus is going to be less effective. You may not feel your greatest, which means you're not going to be able to push training as well. So again, trying to get light earlier in your day, especially if you can get outside, that's perfect. Get a little bit more sunlight throughout the day. Watching overhead lights, a bunch of bright light at night, sitting on your phone in bed, before bed, trying to keep a consistent sleep and wake time, making sure you're not having a bunch of caffeine late at night and alcohol regularly late at night. Those would all be things I would look at as well too. And I think you're going to get more out of your building phase and it's going to keep you leaner in your building phases. And then look at gut health too. Like this is something that I've ignored in the past. And I think you can tie all these things together, right? If your gut health's off, is it a timing thing? Is it a food choice thing? Is until satisfied, not stuffed. Look at all these things. Like if gut health's off, like that's definitely a sign that one, your building phase is going to be less effective. So if you're finding that, again, now that you're eating more food regularly, again, you're feeling super bloated, or you can just tell digestion's off, you're having issues with that. That's a sign that something needs to be looked at and worked on. We don't really want to push through that because again, like that, you're probably putting a strain and load on your GI tract, and you may not be absorbing everything either. And you could just be causing further kind of strain to your gut. So definitely a sign that we would want to look into things here a bit more. Another one would be like, hey, maybe your diet quality thing, right? Either you went too far on the side of your diet quality went down the drain, or you're just trying to fit too much like high volume food in as well too. Or maybe your fiber is super high, right? There's just so many things. Maybe your circadian rhythm's off. So we definitely want to look at gut health as well too in this process there. All right, I want to wrap up this part 2 with some things that I'm working on in my building phase. And so you can see how I've attributed this to myself. So right now, like my sort of thing that I'm focused on in this building phase is I want to continue to build my cardiovascular fitness, optimize health markers to perform my best for workouts, family, and clients, and obviously add some muscle in this process, right? So a few things that I'm doing in this building phase that maybe I haven't done in the past is not taking regular deloads. So I used to schedule regular deloads every 4 to 6 weeks. I haven't used a full one in months. I went over this a couple of weeks ago in the how long should your training cycle be? And instead I'm using lighter sessions when and if I need it and moving workouts around. So I'm being more flexible. And I feel like that's allowing me to get more productive training in than being like, oh, hey, this is the 6th week of this training cycle. I need to take a deload. So being more flexible on that and incorporating more lighter days when I need them versus pushing through. I'm not stressing over progressing every single week. So I, again, used to feel like I needed to add weight or reps every single week in my workouts. And now I'm okay with matching and even some weeks dropping weight and or reps. This also is likely why I feel like I don't need to deload as often. Whereas like in the past, I was like, oh crap, I just need to push. I need to add weight. I'm in a building phase. I need to add reps every single week. That probably slowed me down. I talked to you about HSCRP. Like that could have been something that starts to spike up, right? You just are under recovered, inflamed, etc. I think so. Not saying that's a cause, but again, just something to look at there. So again, just not stressing over progressing every single week there. Less focus on scale weight. So I still care about scale weight and track it to make sure I'm eating enough and not too much. So watching that trend, where's that going? Hey, my weight's been trending down. All right, probably need to make sure I'm eating enough. Hey, it's been trending up a little bit more over the last couple of weeks. I just need to look at my nutrition habits, what I'm doing there. But it's not the only thing I track. Performance, progress pics, and visuals and biofeedback are really my guiding factors now instead of just focusing on pushing weight up and thinking that equals muscle growth, right? So I think that goes both ways there. Or again, thinking that weight's not going up means I need to eat more and no muscle growth. Or if it does come up, I'm like, oh crap, I'm just automatically eating too much. So it's like looking into things a little bit more. It's, hey, if I'm feeling good, performance is going well, I look good, it's like I'm not necessarily overly focused on scale weight, right? And tracking all those other things that I talked about and doing all those things that I talked about earlier, right? That's more important to me than just scale weight. So again, scale weight's important. We do want to monitor it and watch it, but it's not the end all be all because I've seen this happen many times where someone's weight has come up and they're like, now in the past, they would have just decreased calories and gone back to fat loss, but this is exactly where we want to be. Yeah, maybe your weight's up a little bit, but that doesn't mean you're gaining a bunch of body fat in that process. This is just where your body's kind of settling and you need to do this there. So that's why I'm not focusing just on scale weight. For me, cardio. So again, making sure I do cardio. Again, that's something that now is in all my building phases and I'm trying to push it. And this is the phase really to push that as well too, right? And so I've just guys where I start off with 3 lifting days, a little bit more cardio, then went back to 4 days for a couple months, a couple training cycles, and then now I'm back to 3 days for now, and I'll probably go back to 4 here again soon. So periodizing that and making sure I'm getting cardio in. For me, having some restraint around nutrition. In the past, when I was out of a fat loss phase, I'd be way more likely to eat past fullness because I would just tell myself, I'm in a building phase, right? I can do it. So definitely having more restraint around nutrition and eating till I'm satisfied, not necessarily stuffed. And that allows me to still be able to enjoy food, but not gain a bunch of body weight in that process. Again, I did get my blood work, right? So again, like I said, when weight's going up and you have been eating enough for some time, checking things like fasting glucose, insulin, A1C, lipids, because it becomes more important, right? And I do think it will help limit fat gain and make sure that you're in a good spot there. Getting blood work regularly. Fasting and meal timing. So I try to keep food as far away from sleep as possible, which I talked about, right? When you're in a phase where you're seeing the scale go up a bit or eating more, timing before bed becomes more important. And then again, I try to eat within a 12-hour window. Usually that's about 8 to 8 in that there. So again, trying to slightly give my GI a little bit of a break, the blood sugar standpoint, and again, just slightly tipping into that catabolic state every once in a while on there. And then watching gut health, right? So again, I wouldn't pay attention to this in the past, but now I'm looking at quality and regularity of stool. Again, if these are off or if these are good, energy is going to be better, performance is going to be better, and body comp's going to be better. So watching my gut health and making sure that is a regular on there is super important. So those are things I'm doing in my building phase now. So I hope this episode was helpful. Again, if you found it to be helpful, if you could leave a rating and review, that'll help more people find it. Give me a follow on Instagram, Jeff, HOEHN_. That's where I'm most active on social media. And I will talk to you guys soon.